I've buried over 800 people in my life. Some made me cry, others made me question if there's anything beyond death. But only one, just one grave, made me want to drop everything and run from that place, run from myself. It's not easy for a gravedigger to admit fear. We get used to silence, the smell of an extinguished candle, the dry sound of a shovel meeting wood. Routine hardens us. But there are certain things that not even time can erase. It was an ordinary morning that it all began. Overcast skies, the smell of wet earth. I arrived early that day, but Jack had already left. Or rather, he never showed up again. Grave 39. That's what they call it to this day. No one touches it anymore. No employees come near it. No gardeners mow the lawn around it, and if you ask why, you'll hear the silence cutting through the air like a knife. Jack was the oldest of us. The kind of man who knew every inch of that cemetery. He knew where the ground was hardest, where the earth sank after a rain. But that morning, something swallowed him, without warning, without a trace. As if the grave had opened its mouth and decided to feed. You might think it's an exaggeration, that stories like this only exist in movies. But if that's the case, tell me this. Why hasn't anyone ever touched that land again? Because this story isn't about death. It's about what's left, waiting, and what I saw with my own eyes. You might wish you'd never heard. I know you felt something watching in the dark. If you've ever had the feeling that certain places hold more than memories, then this channel is your refuge. Here, we talk about what most prefer to ignore. And if you, like me, believe there are stories that need to be told, no matter how disturbing, then subscribe now and turn on notifications. Because each new video is more than a story. It's a warning. And if you've made it this far, perhaps it's because you've heard this call before. Like it, share it with those who believe and prepare to enter a silence that isn't empty. It's full of presences. My name is Marcus. And for over 20 years, I was a gravedigger at Memorial Hollow Cemetery, one of those old remote places where the weeds grow faster than the number of visitors, and where the names on the headstones are often older than the asphalt road that leads there. I didn't choose this profession. It chose me. I needed a job, something steady, something that didn't require me to deal with a lot of living people. The problem is, over time, you realize that the dead also provide company, and sometimes that company exacts a price. The first thing you learn in a place like this is silence. Not the usual silence, but the kind that hangs heavy in the air, that settles on your shoulders, that seems to watch you from every side. The silence of someone who has seen many things happen, but never had the chance to tell. I also learned that every grave has its own story, and that the earth holds more secrets than any confession made in life. There are graves that sink on their own, tombstones that crack in the middle of the night, and crows that always appear at the same time, as if waiting for something. Jack Melvin was more than a co-worker. He was like a silent guide in that territory where fear was never spoken aloud. He was 61 years old, with a grey beard that was always unkempt, and eyes that seemed to know more than they were saying. He was the one who taught me to listen into the earth. He said that certain graves whispered, that before digging you had to listen. I laughed, of course, until I began to understand he was serious. And the day he disappeared, I was certain he already knew what awaited him. Jack didn't disappear by accident. He didn't trip, he didn't get lost, he didn't abandon everything. What happened that freezing morning was different. It was planned, or worse, it was chosen. And no matter how much we try to rationalize, seek a logical answer, or even believe it was the work of humans, the truth is that there's something in that place that doesn't move, but watches, that doesn't speak, but listens, that doesn't breathe, but waits. And worst of all, No one wants to be the next to dig there. But what really happened to Jack was never recorded, not in the papers, not in the souvenirs, because when the earth swallows someone, what's left is silence and an invisible warning that no one dares break. Grave 39 had always been there, discreet like any other, without lavish ornaments, statues, or flowers. It was just another space among many, surrounded by patchy grass and forgotten by the living. What made it different, at least until that day, was the fact that it had been designated for complete maintenance. Not an exhumation, not a headstone replacement, just structural reinforcement, something common in old cemeteries where the soil subsides over time and rain drains memories underground. Jack was chosen to oversee it because he was meticulous, quiet, trustworthy, and because he knew every corner of that field like someone who memorizes the hallways of their own home. That day, he left the barracks early, his old thermos in hand, his shovel resting on his shoulder, and his small radio strapped to his waist. I arrived shortly after 8 in the morning, wondering at the absolute silence on the east side, right where pit 39 was. I figured he was just concentrating, perhaps listening to the same old blues he played every single day. But as I approached the area, there was no sound, not even the hiss of the radio. And that's when I saw the shovel. It was stuck in the ground with a precision that belied either haste or carelessness. Beside it, the coffee pot had fallen over, still warm, and the battered cap was thrown a few steps away. No footprints around, no signs of movement, nothing to indicate running, falling, or any kind of struggle. Just silence. And that nagging feeling that something had ended before it began. For the first few hours, we thought he might have gone to the bathroom, suffered a sudden illness, or even abandoned work. But as the minutes turned into hours and the sun began to set, it became clear. Jack hadn't left, not willingly. Something had interrupted him, and the most disturbing thing was realizing that no one, absolutely no one, could explain how someone could simply disappear without a trace in soft ground, surrounded by damp earth and ancient tombstones. What many people don't know is that Jack had told me days before that the grave bothered him, as if it breathed. What if the earth doesn't just swallow, but chooses? The truth is, Jack didn't dig an ordinary hole. He awakened something, and what came next? No one had the courage to say it out loud, until now. Jack's absence created a silent uproar within the cemetery. No one said anything, but everyone walked more slowly, looking over their shoulders, their steps cautious, as if the ground itself were about to swallow the next person. When 24 hours passed without news, management finally called the police. Police arrived late the following afternoon, accompanied by sniffer dogs, search drones, and excavation teams. They started with the obvious. They searched the entire eastern section, opened 2 graves near grave 39, scanned the soil with heat equipment, and even dug up old sections with backhoes. They found nothing. No clothing, no fingerprints, no sign of clandestine excavation. The only thing there was emptiness and a silence even thicker than before. The preliminary report called it a non-criminal disappearance. They suggested Jack might have lost his mind, abandoned everything, and disappeared of his own free will. But no one who knew him believed that hypothesis. He had no debts, he wasn't depressed, he was too methodical to simply throw everything away. Besides, his wallet, cell phone, and even the lunch he brought every day were intact in the locker. The police suggested the possibility of kidnapping, but how could someone kidnap a burly man in the middle of the morning without anyone seeing, without him screaming, and without leaving even a tire track or a trace of a struggle? The following week, the investigation was officially closed. The case was filed as an unsolved disappearance. The agent said goodbye with that look of disdain that only someone who had never actually set foot there could have. To them, it was just another urban legend, but to us, no. Something had happened, something that the protocols, equipment, and reports could never explain. The cemetery grew quieter after that. Not the usual silence, but a sick, suspicious silence, as if the tombstones whispered to each other at night. And it was precisely when the police left that the other employees began acting strangely. Very strange, because what came next wasn't investigated. It was hidden. After the police left and the case was officially closed, something changed between us. There were no meetings, no announcements, but the routine began to be followed with a kind of caution that hadn't existed before. It was as if everyone understood, without needing to say it out loud, that Grave 39 was now forbidden territory. The older ones, those who had seen too much to question what couldn't be explained, simply stopped passing near that area. The younger ones, frightened by Jack's disappearance, avoided even looking east. No one swept that area anymore. No one raked up dead leaves. No maintenance had been done since. It was as if the grave's existence had been erased from the cemetery's map. But it remained there, watching. The strangest thing was the way we talked about what happened, or rather, how we didn't talk. All it took was someone mentioning Jack's name for the atmosphere to sink. Conversations would die mid-sentence, eyes would shift, and a chilly silence would fall over the break room. Employees began leaving early. Some requested transfers to smaller, more remote cemeteries. One of them, Clive, dropped everything out of the blue, saying he'd dreamed about the earth pulling at his feet. No one laughed. No one questioned. We just bowed our heads, because we knew deep down he wasn't making it up. Management never mentioned the matter. The order wasn't explicit, but it was clear enough. Leave that area alone. And we did. Because at that point, it was no longer about fear of the unknown. It was about respect, about survival. Jack had been the first, and no one wanted to be the second. Yet even with all this care, something strange began to happen. Small things, things that seemed like coincidences, until they became patterns. And the more time passed, the more the earth of Grave 39 seemed to stir, as if it wasn't satisfied, because that's when the ground began to move on its own. The police left, thinking it was all over. But the cemetery was just beginning to speak. And what the officials did after that, no one dares to record on paper. At first, no one wanted to believe it. After all, it was easier to think that the ground was sinking due to the rains, that the roots of the neighboring trees were distorting the earth, or that the structure of the tomb needed reinforcement, like so many others in that ancient cemetery. But there was something different there, something that defied logic and manifested itself in almost imperceptible details. And precisely for that reason, all the more frightening. One morning, as I drove my tool cart past the side of Grave 39, I noticed that the surface of the earth seemed swollen, as if it was slightly arched, pulsating in gentle movements, almost breathing. I thought it was my imagination, that my eyes were playing tricks on me, but I returned that afternoon alone and saw it again. This time the earth was lower, as if it had sunk 2 or 3 centimeters. No one had touched it. No animal had dug. No rain had fallen. And yet it moved. The dried flowers near the headstone were seen more than once out of their vases, as if someone had carefully plucked them. One day, the wooden cross marking the grave appeared cracked in the middle, not fallen, not rotted, but broken with eerie precision. I had planted that cross there myself 2 years earlier. It was made of solid, treated wood, weather-resistant. That break wasn't natural. The most disturbing thing, however, happened when the footprints began to Appear. Every other morning, boot prints appeared near the grave, as if someone had taken 3 steps and disappeared. No employee wore that pattern of sole, and the security cameras always failed during the early hours. Some said it was a hoax, others pretended not to see, but I started listening. And when you work with death long enough, you learn to recognize the right kind of silence. And there, the silence had a sound, a deep, muffled sound coming from beneath the earth, as if someone was slowly knocking on the wood from within. 3 knocks, always at 3 in the morning, and it was on one of those nights while I was sweeping the yard alone that I realized I was no longer alone. The earth no longer hid, it warned. But that night, it wasn't the ground that moved. It was what was outside of it. And what I saw wasn't meant to be seen by anyone alive. It was a Thursday, near the end of September, that everything reached a new level. A staffing glitch left me alone to close the cemetery that night. I thought it was a temporary thing, that I'd just lock the gates, take a final lap around the perimeter, and be on my way home. But as soon as the sun disappeared behind the gnarled trees surrounding the grounds, the temperature dropped abruptly. There was no wind, but the dry leaves began to move as if something were crawling among them. The streetlight illuminating the eastern sector, the one closest to Grave 39, blinked 3 times and went out. The portable radio I always carried to distract myself on lonely shifts let out a loud hiss and then a whisper. I couldn't make out the word, but it sounded like a lament, a male voice, muffled, drawn out. I didn't recognize the timbre, but my spine shivered as if something very ancient was trying to call me. As I walked toward the tool shed, the sound that most impacted me that night came, the dragging of a shovel over the gravel. It was a dry, metallic sound, coming and going, as if someone were digging calmly. I swiveled my eyes in every direction and for a moment thought I was hallucinating, until the sound stopped, and then it came back louder. This time, closer to Grave 39. I approached slowly, the flashlight trembling in my hands. The dim light illuminated the grave. Nothing seemed out of place, but my attention was drawn to something even more disturbing. Newly formed footprints, leading straight out of the grave to where I stood. The air grew heavy. I felt a pressure on my chest, as if something were watching me very closely, though I could see nothing but darkness. The sound ceased. But before I could retreat, the wind carried to me a phrase spoken by no living person. "Why are you leaving me here?" That voice was familiar, very familiar. But what broke me was the realization it wasn't coming from the wind, it was coming from beneath the earth. The day after that suffocating night, I arrived at the cemetery earlier than usual. The sky was still covered in heavy clouds, and there was a thick silence in the air, as if the morning itself was hesitant to dawn. My head throbbed, my body tired, but what truly disturbed me was the memory of that voice. That phrase whispered close to my ear, as if it had crossed time, space, and even flesh. No matter how many times I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself it was imagination, that fear causes hallucinations, there was something in that intonation that haunted me, something deeply familiar. I knew that timbre. I'd heard it countless times during simple conversations, walking among graves, cleaning headstones, or sharing coffee in the shadows of crypts. It was Jack's voice, definitely, but not the bright, light, casual voice. It was a denser version, more drawn out, as if the voice had passed through some kind of filter or dimension. Still, I recognized it, and it was that recognition that tore me apart inside. I tried to ignore it. I immersed myself in my work. I swept, sanded, and cleaned. Marble, as if the repetition of the movements would be enough to banish that memory from my mind. I kept my distance from Grave 39. I took another path, detoured with forced naturalness, but something had changed within me. Something that seemed to pull me back to that spot, like an invisible anchor. It was as if my own breathing changed as I approached that square of land, as if the air there had a different density, a different desire. And then, without warning, she appeared. It was early. Afternoon. I'd finished pruning near the north entrance. I walked to the storage room to get a rag and change my gloves. When I opened the tool cabinet, that old iron cabinet where we kept personal items and smaller, frequently used objects, my eye was immediately drawn to something out of place. A letter, carefully folded. It was resting between the pair of gloves and the bottle of alcohol I habitually kept there. It was as if someone had secretly placed it there, hoping only I would find it. At first I thought it was a message from management, some misprinted announcement, or even an inside joke. But the handwriting was shaky, uneven, as if written in a hurry or by unsteady hands. And the paper wasn't ordinary. It had an old texture, slightly yellowed and smelled damp, but not a fresh, recent dampness. It was the kind of smell that comes from sealed drawers, from forgotten basements, from places where time stands still, as if it had been stored for years. I opened it. Slowly. The text was direct, short, cruel in its simplicity. There was no greeting, there was no signature, there was no date, just one sentence at the top, written in the same shaky handwriting. You are being watched. Grave 39 is not empty. Those words pierced the little sanity I still had. I felt a dry shiver run down my spine. A cold sweat broke out on my temples. The feeling that this, however absurd, made sense. It was as if someone had translated what I already knew but didn't want to. Admit. I continued reading. Below, a few more lines, fragments of thoughts or records of events I don't know. There was no structure, just loose sentences, as if spat out from the mind of someone on the verge of breaking. They spoke of knocks that repeated multiple times, voices that don't stop even after the funeral, shadows that walk out of sight, and a warning that paralyzed me for long minutes. Don't dig for anything. Don't wake what still sleeps. That sentence echoed within me, and the more I read it, the more it seemed to become a mental whisper, repeated tirelessly like a desperate mantra. I closed the letter, my hands shaking. I searched the administration, discreetly questioned 2 colleagues. I spoke quietly, avoiding appearing paranoid. No one claimed authorship, no one knew anything, no lost notes, no unusual notes, no other similar reports. But the most terrifying thing wasn't in the central lines of the text, it was in the bottom corner of the page, almost faded, as if written with little ink or with a more hidden intention. A name, written in smaller, loose letters, and yet strong enough to make me drop the paper with trembling fingers. Adam Lowell. The memory of that name hit me like a punch. Adam had worked there years before me. He was an assistant gravedigger responsible for cleaning, maintenance, and records. A quiet, solitary man who, according to old stories among the elders, went through something that completely changed him. The accounts were vague, full of silences, but everyone agreed on one thing. He became strange before he died. He began walking around the graves in the early morning hours. He talked to himself. He scratched symbols on the tools. And one day, he disappeared. 3 days later, his body was found in the barracks with no signs of aggression, no injuries, no farewell letter. But his eyes were open, completely black, as if his pupils had dilated beyond their normal size. At the time, they said it was a heart attack, emotional shock, or a psychotic break. But no one slept well for weeks. Now that same handwriting, that same name, was in the letter I'd just read. And it was precisely that night that the nightmares began. But what seemed like a dream would soon become real. The letter moved me in a way that no horror scene I've ever witnessed has. It wasn't just the handwritten words in that shaky, ancient script, but the almost instinctive certainty that it hadn't been written to be read, but to be found. It was as if, by opening that envelope, I'd committed a kind of silent transgression, as if I'd broken a covenant that didn't belong to me, and in doing so, awakened something that had lain dormant for far too long. For the next week, I was gripped by a constant malaise. It wasn't a common ailment, something medication could cure. It was a kind of constant pressure on my shoulders, a dense sensation that followed me everywhere, as if something were haunting my thoughts, even when I tried to rest. The normal sounds in the house seemed louder, more lingering. The creaking of the wood, the creaking of the walls, the hum of the refrigerator. Everything seemed to carry a hidden agenda, as if the house were alive, or worse, occupied by something that didn't move but watched me constantly. I started locking doors twice, checking windows more than once a night, and looking over my shoulder even when I was inside. The nightmares started out subtle but grew stronger. I always woke up at the same time, 3:16 in the morning, always in a cold sweat, always with the feeling that someone was standing at the foot of my bed. I never saw them, but I felt them. It was a presence that didn't need to reveal itself to be perceived. It was there, watching, waiting. The dreams became increasingly vivid. I saw Jack, but not as I had known him in life. He appeared covered in dirt, his eyes wide open, motionless, as if caught between panic and pleading. He stood, holding the shovel, and repeated the same phrase, like an inverted prayer. "You have to come. She chose me." Sometimes the setting was the cemetery, other times my own home. But the feeling was always the same. I had no choice. Something had been decided for me, and now I could only follow. The atmosphere around me began to shift. At home, my digital clock blinked at the same time for 4 nights in a row, always at 3:18. In the bathroom, the mirror fogged up on its own after a shower, even with the window open. And as if to make it clear I wasn't imagining it, finger-like marks appeared on the glass, not randomly but in continuous circles, almost hypnotic spirals, as if trying to pull me into that reflection. The hallway light began to flicker in strange patterns, as if something there was learning to manifest itself. The television turned on by itself one morning, displaying only a black screen with static noise, until the image of a grave appeared for a few seconds. Grave 39. It was the grave. I recognized it. The dreams became even more intense. In one of them, I was digging, but not with fear, with devotion, with a strange mixture of dread and purpose. The earth parted easily, and at the bottom of the grave, what awaited me wasn't a body. It was a mirror, and within that mirror, my own face, but not as I am today. It was a pale, filthy me, with its eyes open and staring back at me, as if it wanted to trade places with me. That's when I understood. It wasn't just about Jack. It wasn't just about the grave. It was about me. The connection was already made. I had seen too much, felt too much, heard enough to be pulled in. It was as if that patch of earth had chosen its next guest and marked my soul as part of the soil. I woke up certain of one thing: running wouldn't work. It would follow me wherever I went, because it wasn't about space anymore. It was about connection, about destiny, about blood. It was some kind of invisible pact, sealed not with words but with presence. And if there was something waiting down there, it wasn't just waiting for anyone, it was waiting for me. The next day, I tried to leave, drive away. I hit the road before dawn, with no clear direction, just the idea of putting distance between myself and that city. But the once familiar route began to change. The signs disappeared. The curves repeated themselves. I felt trapped in an endless maze. The car radio turned on by itself. And guess what the time was on the dashboard's digital? Display 3:18, even in the morning, as if that time had stopped being a ticking clock and had become a living, constant presence, glued to my time. I stopped in a nearby town and rented a simple room, but that night, the hotel wall made the same sound as the floor in my house, the knocking 3 times with meticulously timed pauses. I remained silent, motionless, waiting for some noise. Nothing, just the muffled sound coming from the wood behind the headboard. The feeling was clear. It wasn't following me, it was already inside me. The next morning, I decided to talk to a former priest I knew. Someone who, despite being skeptical of stories like this, was always open to listening. I told him everything, unfiltered, without omitting anything. He listened in silence, his fingers intertwined, his eyes fixed on the cross hanging on the wall. When I finished, he simply asked, "Have you dug?" I replied that I hadn't yet. He nodded with a serious face and said, "Then there's still time, but perhaps not to escape, only to understand." Understand! That word kept hammering in my mind. Understand what? What is there to understand when everything that manifests defies all logic? But still, part of me recognized that, yes, something needed to be understood, something that perhaps could only be revealed underground. I returned home with my mind made up, not out of courage, but out of exhaustion. There comes a time when fear no longer paralyzes. It simply accompanies you. Silently, and by living with it, you learn to move forward. That night I slept in the clothes I'd wear that morning. Sturdy sneakers, a sturdy jacket, gloves, and the new flashlight with replaced batteries. Before going to sleep, I opened the kitchen drawer. The shovel was there, the same one that had appeared leaning against my door days ago. I took it with me. It was part of all this. One way or another, it would be the link between the beginning and the end. At 2:40 in the morning, I left quietly. The city was asleep, but I no longer knew if what was lurking around me came from the city or from the land. I crossed the street, got in my car, and drove to the cemetery's back gate. It was ajar. I knew it would be. The trees swayed, but not from the wind. It was as if they were whispering to each other. The overcast sky hid even the stars. The ground was wetter than it should have been, and the path to Grave 39 felt different, narrower, more winding, as if the cemetery, silently, was molding itself to my destiny. I arrived there at 3:16 sharp. I looked at the grave, and without saying a word, I began digging. It was a cloudy dawn, the kind where not even the moon dares to appear. I returned to the cemetery without warning anyone. I didn't leave a message, didn't answer calls, didn't give a schedule. I just went. As if there was something inside me that I had already decided long before my conscience understood. I parked the car outside, turned off the headlights. So as not to attract attention, jumped the side gate and crossed the winding paths as if walking on dead memories. The ground was wet, but firm. The trees were still. Not even the wind dared to pass through the branches. Everything was suspended. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the earth itself were trying to pull me back. The path to Grave 39 had never seemed so long. I carried only a flashlight and Jack's old shovel, which had been stored, rusting in storage since his disappearance. I didn't want another. It felt too symbolic to ignore. It was like carrying a piece of him with me. A silent, unconscious ritual. There was no logic to it, just an impulse that pushed me relentlessly. I arrived in front of Grave 39 at 3 o'clock sharp. My wristwatch froze at that time. Time seemed to stand still. No crickets, no wind, no sound, just me and that mound of earth throbbing like a barely healing wound. The surrounding vegetation was different. The leaves were darker, too wet for the season, and the grass, normally sparse and patchy, now formed a sort of outline around the grave. as if marking a boundary. I began digging slowly. The first layers gave way too easily, as if they had been recently turned. The earth was light, loose, almost inviting, but with each taste the smell changed. It wasn't the usual odor of damp earth, but something denser, more putrid, something reminiscent of flesh and time. A sour, metallic mixture, impossible to mistake. My eyes watered, not only from the force of the physical effort, but from the instinctive discomfort of disturbing where I shouldn't. The flashlight wobbled, and even with steady hands, it seemed the light refused to point directly into the hole. When I tried to direct it toward the bottom of the excavation, it flickered. When I veered away, it stabilized. It was as if something was rejecting the light. At one point, I felt the shovel hit something hard. It wasn't wood, it was something more. Rigid, with a rough, uneven texture, like a mineral surface but alive. I scraped carefully, and then I saw it. It was a hand, not decaying, not skeletal, but whole, pale, and warm, as if blood still coursed through it. The pulse was clear, visible beneath the translucent skin, and even in the heavy darkness, I could see that the fingers were slightly curled, as if about to close. I stepped back. The air grew thick, suffocating. My ears began to ring. The ringing turned into a low, continuous sound that seemed to come from inside my skull, an internal pressure, as if something inside me was being compressed. And before I could react, the earth around the grave began to shift on its own. It wasn't a landslide. It was a coordinated, almost organic movement. The shovel fell from my hand. The flashlight went out, and in the pitch black, I heard that same voice too close to my ear. "Now you've found me, but you can't go back." The words didn't come with wind or breath. They were injected directly into my mind, like a thought that wasn't mine, but occupied space within me with absurd clarity. My legs locked. My entire body froze. The grave began to close on its own, the earth covering what I dug with impossible speed. It was as if it were protecting what was there, or worse, burying it all over again, this time with me in it. But what made me run wasn't the hand or the voice. It was what appeared standing, watching everything from the other side of the cemetery. At first, I thought it was a crooked trunk, an optical illusion caused by the darkness and panic. But then it moved, slowly, precisely. The narrow shoulders, the elongated silhouette, and a head slightly tilted, as if analyzing my every gesture. I couldn't see its face, only its outline, but there was something about its posture that didn't belong in the world of the living. It was a kind of presence that imposed itself not by size, but by density, by consciousness. I didn't run immediately. I stood there staring, frozen, as if part of me wanted to understand, as if negotiation were possible. But when that figure took a single step forward, and even from a distance the sound of the ground cracking beneath its feet was audible like a siren, instinct took over. I spun and ran without looking back. I slipped, fell, scraped against branches and rocks, but I didn't stop. The once familiar path now felt like a maze. The headstones shifted, some were overturned, others cracked. The trees closed in behind me, as if the cemetery itself were trying to keep me inside. By the time I reached the side gate, my arms could barely lift me. I jumped with difficulty, tore my shirt on the wire, and rolled to the other side. Only then did I look back. Nothing. No figure, no shadow. But there was something in my hand. Something that hadn't been there before. It was a blue ribbon, stained with dirt, tied around my wrist, like the kind a mother might place on a child's arm before a funeral. It took me 2 days to fall asleep again. And when sleep came, it brought images I didn't recognize as my own. I dreamed of an old room, full of stationary toys arranged in a circle. In the center, the bear, That same bear, but different. Its sewn-up eyes were open, and within them were human eyes, living eyes, watching, crying. I woke up with my face wet, but not from sweat. There were dirt marks on the sheets, on my pillow, on the bedroom floor, as if someone or something had come in there. Followed me back. Since that dawn, I stopped trying to understand. I stopped seeking explanations, because whatever's in that grave no longer needs to be found. It's gone. Now all that's left is trying not to remember. But the problem is, he left things, not just inside the cemetery, inside me. And sometimes, when the house falls silent and the dawn settles in, I hear those 3 knocks again, coming from somewhere in the living room. Dry, spaced knocks, as if someone were reminding me that the excavation never ended. It just changed its address. That motionless figure on the other side of the cemetery paralyzed me in a way no sound, no sight, no memory had ever done before. It was as if the night itself had taken shape before me, compressing the space around me. It wasn't just the darkness enveloping her body, it was the unmistakable sensation that she was watching me. Not with ordinary eyes, but with something beyond sight, as if searching within me for everything I feared, everything I hid, everything I'd never said aloud. I couldn't make out his face. It was shrouded in an impossible shadow, as if the night itself had bent down to shield him from the light. No flashlight could penetrate it. No logic, no angle, no explanation could allow me to see. But even without seeing his eyes, I knew they were fixed on me. And there was something else in that presence. Something unsettling because it was familiar. A memory that came not from the mind, but from the body. From instinct. It was like recognizing a childhood scent you hadn't remembered existed. There was something about her posture, the way her arms remained motionless at her sides, that made me think. This wasn't the first time that entity had watched me. She'd been there before, on other shifts, in other nightmares, on other early mornings when I'd felt something following me among the tombstones, maybe even in other lives. I turned to run, but my body seemed to react seconds too late, as if my muscles were being pulled by invisible strings buried beneath my skin. The ground no longer responded as it had before. Gravity seemed altered. With each step, I felt as if I were being dragged downward, as if the earth were calling me back. The earth of Grave 39. And it was there, in that moment, when I thought I couldn't escape, that something utterly inexplicable happened. The earth beneath my feet gave way for an instant, and before I could fall, I felt a force pushing me away from the pit. An invisible, dry, firm energy. I don't know how to describe it precisely, but it wasn't evil. On the contrary, this force saved me, as if Jack, or what was left of him, still resisted down there, still trying to stop the evil from spreading. As if somehow he knew I was there not out of curiosity, but out of survival instinct and out of regret. I stumbled out, my knees bleeding, my hands dirty up to the wrists, my heart pounding so hard I felt like it would burst from my chest at any second. I ran across the grave field without looking back, my lungs burning and my throat closing, choked by a fear that wasn't just physical. It was ancient, a dread that felt like it had been with me forever, but now had found form. As I crossed the cemetery gate, everything stopped. The wind died down. The trees fell silent. The night seemed to have exhaled, as if it had let out an ancient, weary sigh. And for the first time since Jack's disappearance, I felt that someone, or something, had accepted my visit, or worse, scheduled the next one. I stood outside for a few seconds, my legs shaking, feeling the cold air seep through the cuts on my arms and the icy sweat running down my back. I knew there was no turning back. That what had begun as a simple structural reinforcement in a forgotten cave in the eastern sector had become a cycle, and that somehow I was now part of it. I never went back to that place. I never set foot in another cemetery again. I resigned that same day. I left. Without saying goodbye, I left the papers on the table and left before sunrise. I moved to another city. I cut contact with everything that reminded me of that cursed land. I left behind my job, my colleagues, my files, even the few personal belongings that remained in my locker at the dorm. I took nothing. I didn't want to risk carrying any trace of that horror with me. For weeks, I avoided sleep. I stayed awake until my eyes could no longer bear it. When sleep came, it was like falling into a silent abyss where voices called me names I'd never heard. Sometimes I'd wake drenched in sweat, breathless, smelling the damp earth in my own room. Other times, I'd wake up kneeling on the floor as if I'd dug something up in my sleep. Even now, so many months later, I still wake up at 3:16, always the same time, always to the same sound. 3 muffled knocks coming from the floor of my bedroom. It's not metal, it's not plumbing, it's wood knocking from within, and between one knock and the next, silence. But not just any silence. It's the kind of emptiness that screams, that reveals something there, something waiting. I started writing down my dreams. Some images kept repeating themselves. The grave, the cracked cross, the fallen shovel, the blue ribbon, the motionless figure in the distance. But there was one image that began to appear frequently, and it frightened me more than all the others. A child, always with her back turned, always standing next to grave 39, always with a toy in her hand, sometimes a bear, sometimes a doll, sometimes something that looked like a music box. And every time I tried to get closer, she slowly turned her face away. But the dream ended before I could see her eyes. I went back to studying. I researched old documents. I found strange records about the land where the cemetery was built. They said that before becoming a holy field, that land served as a shelter for people considered impure, cursed, and forgotten. The sick, criminals, women, accused of witchcraft, men buried alive out of revenge, abandoned children. No one could say for sure what happened there, but what is certain is that pain accumulated in that soil, like a poison that spread silently, waiting for the right moment to rise to the surface. And the strangest thing is that today, for some reason, a shovel appeared leaning against my door. It wasn't just any shovel, it was Jack's shovel. The same one, the rust, the worn handle, the subtle mark on the metal. I recognized it instantly, even though I was in another city, even though I'd left everything behind. I didn't open the door right away. I watched through the crack. The street was empty, no movement, no cars, no breeze, just the shovel. Still, leaning against it, as if it had returned on its own. It took me hours to work up the courage to touch it. When I finally did, I realized it was clean. No dirt, no smell, as if it had been recently polished. But there was something stuck to the base of the handle, a piece of paper, rolled up like an old message, and inside, written in a script I didn't recognize but somehow familiar, was a single sentence. You opened it. Now finish it. Today, that grave remains there, intact, like an open wound in the heart of the cemetery. It was impossible to remove or cover what lies there, and no one dares to pass by. The silence that surrounds it is heavy, almost palpable, as if it holds a secret that transcends the limits of life and death. I could try to forget it all, pretend I didn't hear it, that I didn't see it, that nothing has changed. But I can't. The truth is, it remains alive, vibrating beneath the earth, waiting for someone to come closer and feel what I felt that night. A dark invitation, a silent threat. If you think this is just any old story, you're mistaken. This goes far beyond what the eyes can see or the mind can comprehend. There's a world hidden in the shadows, a place where time stands still and the dead rest, undisturbed, and Grave 39 is living proof of this. Now it's up to you to decide how far you want to go, if you have the courage to face what few have dared to tell, and if you want to continue this journey with me, hearing stories that reveal the mysteries buried beneath the surface of reality. Subscribe to the channel right now. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episodes, where I'll bring stories that will shake your mind, your faith, and your deepest fear. Because what's coming is even more disturbing and even less explained. But remember, some doors once opened never close again. And what awaits you in the next video may be exactly what changes your perspective on what truly lies in the shadows. Click, subscribe, and get ready. The darkness is just beginning.